be viewed as self-interest on our part, but I think the introduction of recent laws, some of the things that have happened recently have been a real wake-up call for us. A real wake-up call.
For almost 20 years since 9/11, national security has been a national obsession. In the name of national security, our federal parliament has passed at least 75 pieces of legislation. It's been one of the few areas of consistent bipartisanship. But in recent times, the relentless push for more and more powers in the name of national security has started to face some resistance. Things came to a head with raids on News Limited and ABC journalists in May, just weeks after the federal election. Suddenly, instead of simply being seen as laws to curb terror, the laws were being seen as an attack on democratic freedoms and accountability.
We have many laws that criminalise journalism. We may not be living in a police state, but we are living in a state of secrecy.
This rare alliance of Australia's biggest media organisations, fronting the Intelligence Committee together, generated plenty of headlines last week. But most of the reporting focused on the fallout from the police raids, rather than the broader issues over the misuse of national security powers heard at the inquiry.
And the problem that we're trying to draw attention to today is that many of the laws that we're talking about are cloaked under the guise of national security, but actually apply much more broadly.
If there is an imbalance between national security and press freedoms, then that imbalance needs to be addressed through law to ensure that there is no ambiguity.
Pressure from media organisations, amid threats to jail some of their journalists, had put the government and the federal police on the back foot after the raids.
I'm not going to rule in or rule out anyone being subjected to further charges.
These are matters that were being pursued by the AFP operationally at complete arm's length from the government.
Australia has become a much more secretive country since 9/11 after a series of incremental reforms. Now, a tussle is underway about whether this web of legislation has created a corrosive and unaccountable culture and whether changes are needed.
In the United States, if you contact a public official, they have an obligation in their constitution to be as open as they possibly can. In this country, public officials seems to have the reverse obligation.
None of this is new to journalistic veteran Brian Toohey, whose just published book Secret documents the growth in a secretive culture in Australia that started in the military and intelligence circles but has burgeoned in the era of national security politics.
There's been a massive increase in the willingness to classify documents which don't need to be classified. Both major political parties in this country have gutlessly refused to stand up to the intelligence agencies and the police who are asking for more powers all of the time.
The major media players, the ABC, News Corp and Fairfax, argued the impact of all the legislation introduced in the name of national security has had much broader ramifications, as have the recent raids.
When the raids occurred, Adele Ferguson, one of our better-known investigative reporters, was dealing with a whistleblower who wanted to expose the cosy relationship between the auditor EY and National Australia Bank. And Adele said, quote, "The whistleblower freaked out after the raids happened."
In the last 5 years alone, the AFP has received 75 referrals for potential unauthorised disclosure offences. However, there have only been 2 occasions in that time where an investigation has led to that action taking place.
Media organisations wanted to know why, when there has been so much legislation passed dealing with national security, the police chose to use the Crimes Act and stolen goods as the basis for their searches.
And rather than use legislation that sits there to protect the nation's secrets, legislation was used I won't say randomly, under the criminal code of receipt of stolen goods.
The Law Council says vaguely worded laws have allowed for the targeting of journalists and their sources under laws ostensibly designed for terrorists.
There has been an attempt by some parliamentarians to blame the Australian Federal Police in relation to these raids. So I would suggest they look in the mirror and blame themselves for not properly reading the legislation and thinking through the impact this would have on media and indeed citizens.
Part of the problem is that the laws are inconsistent as to whether journalists can defend themselves for reporting in the public interest.
The prosecution should prove that it was not in the public interest of the journalist to be able to run the story.
The debate about secrecy comes amid a period of considerable upheaval in the security community. Both the heads of the Federal Police and ASIO are soon to leave their jobs, and there is widespread talk that there will be a lot more changes at the top of the rest of the public service over the next 12 months. That only helps consolidate the influence of this man, Michael Pezzullo, who has a tough line on leakers.
One is they leaked a top secret document, and frankly, subject to judicial process and fair process, they should go to jail for that.
Pezzullo is the Secretary of the Home Affairs Department, which encompasses both ASIO and the AFP, as well as border security. He was particularly exercised by the leak of a document in which he and the head of the Australian Signals Directorate, the cyber intelligence agency, discussed a plan to allow targeted snooping about transnational crime on computer networks hosted within Australia, though he insisted not on individuals' bank accounts and text messages.
There was substantive material in the back end of that document, plus in the attachments, that spoke about economic and society-wide damage that could be wrought through malicious cyber attacks.
Despite the public embarrassment, there are few signs that the security establishment or the government are seriously contemplating legislative changes to address what have been exposed as major problems and inconsistencies in laws now threatening journalism.
We should never permit legislation to be put through our parliament that criminalises the actions of our journalists. Not in this country.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.